and welcome to our 8th installment of One-on-One with Broadway director and choreographer and Tony nominee Larry Fuller.
Evita! Don't cry for me, everybody out there in Facebook Musical Theater land. Yep, Evita has been my annuity. Anyway, so I think where we were last time, I had just been asked to do Evita while we were finishing up with On the 20th Century. And so as soon as On the 20th Century opened, we were off to England because it was done in London first. Hal was terrific about collaborating. I mean, we took that show apart together and put it back together again, and we both knew what we were expected to do, where I was taking over the staging, where he was doing the staging, and I was going to maybe musicalize it a little, or where it was about 50-50, the staging. And so we went through every single scene, and since it was what I would call a kind of documentary review telling the life of a famous woman, and we had to make, because there wasn't any real book, we had to make all of the numbers kind of metaphorical, visually, poetic, to help tell the story as well as the lyric. Because when you go to a sung-through musical, you don't really get all of it, no matter how hard you listen, unless you really, really are familiar with the music before you go. Anyway, so we did things like, I remember we were traveling by air, of course, to London for a meeting, and we were sitting next to each other working on different aspects of the show. And I was reading one of the biographies of Evita, and lo and behold, there on the pages were a list of the lovers she had as she slept her way up to Perron. And starting with a radio guy who helped get her a radio show. And she was also becoming a film actress in Buenos Aires. So she was pretty well known by the public before she even met Perron. So he certainly knew who she was. But anyway, there was this list of men that she had slept with, going up the ladder, so to speak. And I turned to Hal and I said, "Oh, Hal, look, here's the list of all the names and the characters that they are that should come out of that door in Good Night and Thank You." Because I had come up with the idea to use a revolving door, so that she was the bedroom side of it, which would be very obvious, was when she was alone and when she was speaking without, just speaking her thoughts about these men. And the other side was the actual the exterior of her bedroom. So these guys would come out the door, she'd say goodbye, goodbye, the door would close, and then it would turn, and there she'd be in her bedroom saying things about life, love, and the pursuit of success. So we took that list and made it come true as far as the costuming and so on. And I don't know if it was the same trip or it was another trip, but we were sitting next to each other on a plane and doing our own little, creative working things. And I heard Hal say, "Musical chairs. No, that won't work." And I said to him, "What did you say, Hal? Did you say musical chairs?" he said, well, yeah, I thought of musical chairs for the Art of the Possible when the generals are, getting eliminated and Perón ends up being the head honcho. And I said, Hal, that's a wonderful idea. It's a great idea because it shows the ridiculousness and the childishness of the different military guys. And he said, oh yeah, well, maybe I'll try it. But then what he did was he made musical chairs on rocking chairs so that there could be motion all during the number. And he kind of blocked it out, and then I musicalized it. And that's how we worked, more or less. The opening, he would do some, I would do some. The face in the crowd thing, where, anyway, doesn't matter. Called What I Did, What He Did, What's the Difference? It's the way it came out. And I had a really big dance number in it called What's New Buenos Aires, which was a number depicting when Eva, first comes to Buenos Aires, very excited teenage girl. She was only like 15 or 16 then. And it was a ballet, really. It told the story of how she arrived, was not really accepted by the locals except for the men, and then some aristocrats come on, and she's totally enchanted by them and their beautiful clothes and so on, but they just walk right over her, and she gets so upset with them, and that is a point in the show that is realized later in Act 2 when the actress hasn't learned her lines and she has them all stripped of their finery. That's the result of what they did to her in What's New Buenos Aires. And anyway, it was an 8-minute dance number. While she was singing and doing things in front of the dancers, they were dancing their balls off. And I thought, this is going to be the number that's going to really stop the show because it's such a big number and it has so much in it, so much energy. And by the time we were in previews, it had a kind of down star quality, so it went down instead of up, star quality, whatever. And so it didn't get such a great big hand the first time or two in front of an audience. And I thought, well, maybe we got to put the showbiz button on it so they get it. And it is the first time in the show, like almost 20 minutes into it, before the audience is allowed to applaud, because there is no place for them to applaud up until the end of that number. And so I put the showbiz like, well, that thing on the end. Didn't help it at all, and it was misplaced stylistically. The way the rest of the show was staged, it just stuck out. It wasn't showbiz, this one. It wasn't a musical comedy. So I put it back so that it had the down ending instead of the up. And then, of all things, it never did stop the show, by the way. But in Perrón's Latest Flame, which is where the military bloc and the bloc of aristocrats are singing and moving around each other and so on, and Che is in that too quite a bit. That one is what everybody remembers, and it's just the visual of it, I guess. And the first preview, when the military came on, and as they finished their first section, the audience started applauding. I was flabbergasted. I had no idea it would have that kind of an impact. You just never know. I mean, the lyrics, the number, it kind of said what you had to do. But of course, there are lots more than one way to do it. So we were in England auditioning for the cast, and there was a big movement in the newspapers. Hometown boys, meaning Andrew and Tim, Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice, were now big success because of Jesus Christ Superstar, and here they were having a musical directed by Hal Prince. So it was weird that the papers, like you couldn't kill it with a baseball bat. They were just all the time on this show, and they were in the London papers. Quite often, the second or third page has a beautiful, lovely young topless woman, and that got replaced by a picture of one of the actors coming out of the stage door who had just auditioned for Ava, and they did a little interview with her, and then she told them what her experience was. And so it was, and then we found a journalist hiding in the theater one day during auditions, and they had to escort him out. It was really something. So all of London, anyway, was waiting for this. And the part had been promised to a really good friend of mine, Bonnie Schoen, who was employed by the Prince office side by side by Sondheim. She was a standby, and then she went on, when they went on the road, she took over. Anyway, Hal told her he wanted her to do it. And Andrew Lloyd Webber had her sing for him once in New York or something, and he said he wanted her to do it. So we were, towards the end of auditions, we were down to just a few Avas. I think there were like 4 or 5. And of course, Elaine Page was one of them. And none of them were particularly a great choice from the auditions anyway. And I said to Hal, well, what about Bonnie? I mean, I thought she was going to do this. He said, you're right, I want to get her over here right away. So in 2 days, they flew Bonnie Schoen to London. They'd given her copies of the music for What's New Buenos Aires and Don't Cry for Me. And so she came on stage, she got there. I mean, she auditioned the same day she landed, so she'd been on a plane all night, but it was her turn, and she got on stage, and she just knocked it out of the ballpark. She was so terrific compared to. So, at the end of the audition, Hal said, well, I mean, it's like night and day, it's got to be Bonnie. And then one by one, the British contingents, set designer, costume designer, lighting designer, Andrew, Tim, they all had some, well, yeah, but she isn't this, or yeah, but she isn't that. It was strange. Hal and I couldn't understand it. And so it was arranged for Andrew to hear her alone, work with her alone the next day at his house, and with Elaine Page, who was the only one we figured we could possibly cast that was British. And so the next day, Andrew finished, and Hal heard from him, and evidently Andrew said, well, either one of them can sing it. That's not a problem. And then things started going towards Elaine, and Bonnie was not going to be hired. So I said to Hal, what the hell is going on? And he said, well, the press will be all over us if we don't hire a British girl. I mean, look what they're doing already. But he said, we've told Bonnie that she will do it in New York. And I heard him on the phone with her, and he told her that. He said, "You will do it in New York, but don't tell anybody. You have to keep this quiet for now." And Bonnie told me that Andrew told her the same thing. So we hired Elaine. She worked very hard in rehearsal. She'd never done a big lead. She'd done a lot of featured roles. And I said to Hal one day, about 2 weeks into rehearsal, "Do you notice that Elaine is not bringing something of her character, her acting ability? She's not creating something for herself. She's just doing what we tell her, and she's doing it very well, but it's not alive." And he said, "Yeah, I've been so busy with stuff on other things on the production, I haven't really given her enough attention." So then he started working with her every day for about an hour by himself. And she was certainly improving. But the first preview, she came out on that stage and suddenly, bam, Evita was there. It was like, wow, what happened? And I guess she's just an actor who doesn't really give it all or know exactly whatever in rehearsal. But she was phenomenal. And so we were just fine as far as London goes. Then at the end of the first preview, the audience, it was a full house, and the audience was just kind of clapping politely. And Hal had told the company, well, we didn't have official bows done yet. So he said, everybody's on stage at the end of the show. They're all spaced so you can see everybody. He said the leads go off and everybody else just stay on stage. And when the curtain goes out, turn around and bow, and then you come on, you come on, you come on, and then the company bow, over and out. And so that's what they did. So Hal and Ruth and I, Ruth Mitchell, Hal's associate, were standing on house left in an aisle right next to the wall. And so when the curtain went up and the audience started applauding politely and everything, and so we went into the Saul's bar, and we came around and we went into the house again, down the other house right aisle, because that's what led to the door backstage. And what happened was the audience was still just doing this, kind of almost like automatons. And the curtain went back up again, and the actors were scurrying to get back on stage because they didn't know there was going to be another bow, but the audience wouldn't stop. And then it just exploded. And they were screaming and so on, and I looked at Hal and Ruth, and Hal said, "Well, I guess it works." I mean, it was the most understated comment, because we really had no idea what we had, because it was such a hybrid thing that nobody had ever done anything like it. And we weren't sure whether they'd boo us off the stage or love it, and luckily they loved it. And we only had 11 previews, so that was a law for some reason in British West End theater at that time. I don't know if it's changed. So you haven't got a hell of a lot of time to change and fix and so on, especially if you're in big trouble. So we did different things, like I put the ending on What's Good Buenos Aires, and then put it back the way it was, and the show stayed almost exactly like it came out of the rehearsal hall. It just worked. And so there was one thing that I was always on Hal about, though. There's a piece at the end called The Montage, which is a kind of redo of several numbers from the show that kind of, go back and remind you of parts of her life as she's lying in the bed dying. And it did go on and on and on and on. And I kept at Hal. I said, "You've got to cut the montage. It's too long. Let the bitch die. I mean, we already know she's going to." So finally, he did. He cut it, and that's what we have now. So it was a great creative experience, and it was a rare thing that where you have both a hell of a time creating it, and then to have it to be such a tremendous success. It's hardly ever happens, and I thank the Terpsichorean gods that that it happened for for Evita. But when we came back to do it in New York, we wanted to bring Elaine Page over, and Equity wouldn't let us because she wasn't a star here. Nobody knew who she was. So we got into auditions again, and there were it was right down to the end. There were about 5 ladies, and Hal wanted them all. They went to a costume house and gave them a version of the white dress, certainly not as elaborate, and they all had to wear something that they thought was extremely young and teenagey when they had to do What's New Buenos Aires, and then they had to do Don't Cry For Me in the white dress, and they even put the blonde chignon wig on her. So they all had to dress up for the audition. And I said to Hal I said, well, Bonnie's not on the list. I thought she was going to do this. And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, you've got to let her audition at least. You can't just flip her off. And he said, well, okay, we'll put her in the last auditions. And I said, well, what is it about her that you've changed your mind? And he said, well, Elaine is more vulnerable inside and harder on the outside. And Bonnie's the other way. She's more hard on the inside and vulnerable. I said, I don't get it, but, if that's the way you feel. And so poor Bonnie, she was so disheartened when she came on to do the audition. I knew immediately she wasn't going to do very well, and she didn't. She was just emotionally such a wreck. And then she didn't get the part. Ruined her life for a few years. Anyway, you know who did? Patti LuPone. And as soon as the auditions were over, Hal jumped up and said, well, there's no choice, is there? It's got to be Patti. It's got to be Patti. Blah, 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 Patti. And and Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice were standing there like they couldn't get a word in. So Hal, I should say, kind of bullied Patti into the part. However, when we got to, and Patti was a really, really good actress who happened to be able to sing quite well, but nobody had ever been asked, a female Broadway star, to sing a score in the range that he wrote it in, because it goes up above the break in most women's voices, from their chest voice to their soprano head voice around a D, and she had to sing an A flat, or an A, I forget. So, which is in New Argentina at the end of Act 1. And so we got into rehearsals. Everything was going pretty good and pretty fine. We got to LA, and oh, by the way, Mandy Patinkin was hired in one audition. We didn't have anybody that Hal liked. And Joanne, oh come on, his casting director. Anyway, she went to a show, a small musical down at the Public Theater, and he was in it. And she thought he'd make a great Che. So he came in right at the very, very end, and he auditioned one time and got the part, which is very rare to have only one audition. But God knows he was a great Che. So yes, we were out of town in LA. We had 6 weeks to play in LA and 6 weeks in San Francisco before we came into New York. And we had the orchestra rehearsal at one of the big rehearsal rooms at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion in downtown Los Angeles, where we were playing for 6 weeks. Dottie's Pavilion, as they call it. And Patty was so inexperienced at singing a role like, especially like this. I mean, she had sung Meadowlark in The Baker's Wife. Anyway, she sang full out against the orchestra. And these orchestrations, there was so much electric stuff in them. Nobody could sing over it. I don't care how big your voice was. And she just sang her throat out, and she had no voice for 2 days. So the first 2 previews, her understudy went on, who was a dancer, and Terry Klossner, excellent in the role. It's just that Terry didn't have the charisma that stars have. And on the 3rd performance, then Patty came back, and when we opened, I don't remember how many previews we had, maybe 3 or 4, but we opened, and the woman who was Sylvie Drake, I think was her name, she was the LA Times critic at the time. She hated Patti LuPone. I mean, she ripped her to shreds in the audition, in the review, and they put it on the bulletin board backstage. And so it was like the elephant in the room. Nobody would say a word about, oh, hi, Patty, how are you? I hope nobody said a word. But Sylvie Drake had such a campaign against Patty for some reason. In the 6 weeks we were there, the opening night critiques. 2 weeks later, she did another article about how terrible Patti LuPone is as Ava. And 2 weeks after that, she did another one. I mean, it was like, I don't know if any of you remember how John Simon ripped Liza Minnelli apart in the New York, or whatever paper it was, but the whole of Broadway was really upset that he'd pick on her physicality and stuff, and that's exactly what Sylvie Drake did. And so Patty was, you know, having a brave face, but the elephant was, there were a few of them backstage by then. And Patty came to me at the end of the run in LA, and she said, Larry, I have something I really, really want to talk to you about. Can we stay after the tech rehearsal in San Francisco? And I said, sure, Patty, of course. So after the technical run through at the Golden Gate in San Francisco, which is where we played 6 weeks before we went into New York, and everybody was gone. We made sure the theater was empty. And I was sitting on the edge of the stage, kind of a la Barnum and Trump, Judy Garland. And Patty came out in jeans and a sweatshirt and her hair all kind of tousled, no makeup. She sat down next to me on the edge of the stage, and she started to talk. And before she got hardly anything out, she started sobbing, crying like, oh God, oh no. And I said, Patty, what is it? And she said, well, the role is controlling me because I'm never sure vocally whether I'm going to be there or not. I never know for sure until I get to the end of the first act when I have to sing that high A. And I never know if it's going to come out. And so my whole my whole performance is just, I don't have a hold of it. I'm scared of it. And I said, Patty, because she knew there was something in the air about replacing her, which there was. I think the authors wanted her gone. But Hal stood right by her. And so I said, look, Patty, I'll talk to Hal about, no, don't talk to Hal, oh no. And I said, oh, come on, he's not a god sitting in a marble throne. I mean, he's your director, and he wants you to be good. He wants to help you if you're having trouble. I know he will help you. Oh, I don't know, okay. So I went right to Hal and told him about the experience, and within a day, they found one of the singers in the ensemble, David Fosberg, was a very, he was a really accredited voice teacher. So he started working with Patty every day except matinees, and of course the day off, so 4 times a week. And by the time we got to New York, she was singing it, standing on her head spinning with no problem whatsoever. But she did curse out Andrew Lloyd Webber more than once for writing it. Excuse me, the way he did. Now I think every Broadway lady has to be able to do that. I mean, it's just expected. And at the time, it was totally unique. So that was many of the things that happened on Evita. There were many, many, many more, of course, but we don't have time for many, many, many more. So I will say this. We did Evita in London. We did on the 20th Century in New York. It opened, I think, in February, March, right after the first of the year, 1978. And then we went straight to London and rehearsed, and it opened June 22nd, I think, 1978, with this bang, bang. And then we came back to New York, and in the fall, we came back to New York, in the fall, we did Sweeney Todd in New York. Well, that was a show nobody wanted to see, although it's become a classic, and I happen to think it's Stephen Sondheim's masterpiece. But it was just too, with all the blood and so on, and the storyline, people didn't want to come. Although Texas Chainsaw Murders was playing right down the street, but that's a different audience. So Sweeney, unfortunately, in its original production and first national tour, lost money. Both of them lost money. I think the Bus and Truck made money with June Havoc played it, and she was really good. Anyway, my point in a way is to have one of those shows in your career would be wonderful. But I had both of them, and they were both within 1 year. So there goes another piece of luck.
Any questions?
I think of the many brilliant moments that were in the staging of Evita, one of my favorite is in Buenos Aires, where Ava is like 2 counts behind the rest of the Argentinians.
Oh.
And how did that come about? I just thought that was wonderful.
That's called the cacophony. It's about disagreement. And the boys were on the count, and the girls were on the and. So it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and that leads into what was 2 big circles, the girls on one side and the boys on the other. This is all what's going on in her head, supposedly. It's called the Devil Dance, when they were all screaming and yelling and jumping and all that stuff. And so you're asking about the cacophony. It was about disagreement. between the males and the females, but just disagreement, period.
I had a very argument with a pretty well-known TV actress who we went and saw that with together. That part really bothers me because Patty always looks like she's behind. It always looks like she can't dance. And I said, no, that's not what it's about. So we argued about that one moment constantly because it looks like she can't dance. It looks like she's behind everybody. But I love that moment.
She was with the girls, which was on the and beat.
Yes. That's...
Yes.
Colden Lamb asks, where did the inspiration come from for the iconic Evita arms for Don't Cry For Me, Argentina?
That actually came from a photo of the real woman.
Mm.
And Hal gave it to our Ava.
And the Aristocats, the staging of the Aristocats, we now see it so many times since then. Clubs tightly grouped together in some kind of thing. Now, that was the first time we'd seen anything like that. Idea how that came about?
Well, yes, because the lyrics, of course, were that both the military hated her, and the oligarchs, the aristocrats, also hated her because they considered her to be of very low birth and getting too haughty. So it's getting more important than she should be. And the military disagreed because they thought she was making a fool out of her own. But the lyrics were such that I thought, okay, I'm going to have a group of, I went to a military high school, by the way, in St. Louis, and I never could figure out why until the Vita it all came to fruition, because I knew how to march. So I made the military, they were called parody military, a block of 333, and they were, in my mind, like little metal soldiers that could only move at the arm joint and the hip joint. And everything else is very stiff. And their feet, when they'd march, were squashing people. They're like bugs. And so I gave that concept to the guys. And the aristocrats were mannequins in Herod's window. And they were on a conveyor belt. So I tried to get them to walk so that you didn't really see their feet move much, but sometimes they had to step out. And all of their finery and glory and so on, and their jewels and the clothes, but hollow, no feelings, absolutely no empathy, no compassion about anything. And so they were just a group of hollow mannequins echoing what the rest of them said. So one said it, another said it, they all said it. And that's why they had these stiff movements, like when they'd get stuck, then their motors would kick back into position. I had to move them, that staging drives singers to bedlam. I mean, because none of it makes counting sense, because the music isn't 4/4 anyway, keeps changing bar signatures. But I had to move the military always in straight lines. That's how military moves. And I had to adapt the aristocrats to move around them at times so that they wouldn't bump. And yet still keep in motion so it didn't go dead. So they would have like a count of 3 one way and 2 this way and 5 that way, and they'd go like, what are you? They'd really get upset, but they got it eventually. I've known ladies from that group in different companies that say, well, I've done the aristocrats backwards in high heels. I can do anything.
I love it. We don't have more questions. All right, well, We are going to be finishing up this week on Thursday
I know.
at 2 o'clock. We're going to try. If we have to extend, we'll extend. But I think we're going to give it a shot and see what we can do. Thanks for showing up today. I know we always have a lot of people on after the fact. So Stanley Cohen, does he want to talk about taking over for Marilee?
Taking over for Maryland.
Taking over for
Oh,
Marilee.
that's next week.
That's going to be next week,
Next
Stanley.
week, Stanley Cohen, you're going to have to watch to find out your answer.
Okay, well, we will be back then, not next week, we'll be back on Thursday in 2 days at 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time.
Okay.
Thanks for spending some time with us. We'll see you on Thursday.